summarize this series on uprooting capitalism, in part two, I do talk about labor, and in particular, the division of labor. So I talk about how concepts of labor fundamentally transformed during the transition to capitalism. And one of the primary ways that that happened was the division of labor from women's work and other work. So primarily women were, held a variety of different roles within their communities. And during this transition, what happened was a push to really have women serve very limited roles. And basically those roles are reproduce, right? Because we need labor. That means we need people. That means we need babies, right? So really forcing women into roles that were very much about producing children and raising children. And what that did for society, I think often people take for granted and don't fully grasp the importance of that, because women primarily not only had all these different roles in society, but all those roles were valued. So when suddenly they're doing roles that literally have no value because there's no economic value tied to that. Today we just take it for granted that women are not going to get compensated for doing laundry, for washing dishes, for raising their children, right? So that's what I mean by not valued. Like literally there's no economic value put on this labor. And also the labors they were doing outside of that, they were intentionally pushed out of. It very much became, this is your one role, this is what you're supposed to be doing, and you will not be compensated for that. So I'm sure you can imagine that fundamentally changed women's relationship to power, okay, but also the power relation within the community. Because prior to that, men, women, non-binary, whoever you were, you had different roles and different relationships in the community. Well, not only did that create the gender binary, right? So suddenly there is no trans, there's only female or male, you're one or the other, but it created a power imbalance because men's work is economically valued, they will be paid, and that created, of course, a dynamic in the home where the woman does not have that economic power. One of the things that this feminist scholar, Silvia Federici, emphasizes is that the tension that existed between the ruling class and the working class basically got transferred or transmuted into the tension now that's within the home, and that power dynamic between the woman and the man, and also between the child, right? Because the child has also a place in that power relationship. And what that did was it broke solidarity among the working class, because suddenly you're in a power battle with one another and you're less equipped to actually push against, whatever oppression might be happening for you and your community. So those were very significant social changes that happened at that time, that I really try to go into in depth in this article. And I wanted to talk about how today I feel I hear some of that come out when I even hear about the notion of so-called work-life balance, right? This is still a way that we're kind of talking about, but in a very oblique way, in a very kind of subtle and not informed way around what are expectations that we have of each other and how we are thinking of labor as something that's divided and often in a gendered way without realizing it. Like we don't need gendered terms for there to actually be gendered concepts within the language that we're using.
Yeah.
So the work-life balance is like absolutely a way that I see this come up. And I think it sets an unfair standard for us to navigate some of the conflicts and the tensions I was talking about within our individual lives, right? Like you must figure out this balance is kind of the implicit message behind that phrase and how it gets used. Which again, very much plays into the larger narrative of these are individual issues, these are family issues, these are not cultural, societal, or economic issues. Even though you scratch beneath the surface, if you know your history, they are collective social and economic issues.
Wow. In talking about, and before I didn't record, but in what we were talking about a little bit earlier, just the tossing of the passing of the torch to another group of people. So it was a hierarchy problem, or problems that then got passed on. How do I want to phrase it? At any point, like, you hear a lot of people, conspiracy theorists, if you will, who often say it's the government, they're dividing up families. At that time, was there an awareness of what was being done initially? Like that piece there, was there that level of awareness, or was it more of the human state of, it's uncomfortable, it doesn't feel good for me, and then you're projecting it on to something else? My question's not as clear, but what part, where did the intentionality start outside of the switching, like the gender roles for women? I'm talking about when it came to and I guess I'm answering my own question then, of the outcome within the family. That was one of the impacts. But today, present day, you hear a lot of the blame shifting to the higher government and all of the laws and resources. For example, when we talk about welfare in the Black community, women, child support, those things are to separate the Black family. Well, in actuality, it's anyone who's partaking in those services that it's causing problems in the family. So then the question for me becomes, well, if we keep going backwards, where's the intentionality of that decision actually start?
Got it. I think I got it.
Yeah.
Let me respond, and you can let me know if this is satisfying, or if you have more things come up around this. There's a few things here, and this is a long history. This is over centuries, and it's very difficult to distill that much history in a short thing. But that is my goal, is to give some larger themes and larger narratives. I think that firstly, I'll talk a little bit about the history, a little bit more around the history. So remember, the governing class was the ruling class in Europe for a really long time. We're talking about kings and queens, right? We're talking about people who had economic power and political power, right? Those things were inextricably intertwined. And a lot of people argue for capitalism as an alternative to that, because it created the mercantile class. It created a different class of people who could, run businesses and basically grow economic power separate from the political power that had been consolidated into these aristocracies. So some people do argue, that still to this day, that capitalism is better than other things, blah, blah, blah. But what actually was happening on those lands was not quite that simple. And it's difficult for us to understand because we're in a different cultural context now. But what was really fascinating to me about this history, and I go a little bit more into this in part 3, is the relationship to the land was fundamentally different. The land is something that we don't think about now because the world has been almost fully colonized. But at that time, it was not. And so, yes, there were, governing powers, ruling powers, but the people who were not in those positions of power still had community relationships. They had a connection to the land. They had shared ownership and appreciation for the land that they were on, not this privatization of land, right? So a lot of that was very much disrupted by this whole idea of everything has to have economic, quantifiable value. Everything will be privatized, managed, and owned, right? That fundamentally changed the fabric of society. So yes, there were some opportunities for certain people, only certain people, to be able to become business owners, become business professionals, and built into the law, so built into the political system, were exclusions, where women will not be included, people of certain backgrounds or professions will not be included. So that it still is a tandem thing in terms of economic power and political power kind of working in tandem with one another to consolidate, right? Even though it seemingly looked different, they were still very much working arm in arm. And I would say that I think that that is similar to how we operate today in modern day America, is where I live. So I will speak primarily about that experience and say, I think that's still very much the case. You know, people who run for office often have a lot of wealth. That's why they're able to run these very expensive campaigns. They get that wealth either through their own, you know, resources or through relationships they have to people that have wealth.
Yeah.
You know, and either way, it's kind of, that's still a big underpinning. And then when it comes to legislation, you've got a lot of legislation that is blocked because of industry, right? Because of people who have money, still holding a lot of power. Yes, I do believe that the people have the power, but I think we still haven't figured out how to eliminate some of the, and this is the cultural stuff. This is the cultural and social stuff that is separate, but is so intertwined with this history and with these institutions, because we still are carrying narratives around who is excluded and who's included. And that very much informs what that relationship with our government is like. So when I hear different arguments about the government, I think some of them are valid. I think it's important to recognize that there is validity to those criticisms. I also feel like it's not as simple as the responsibility lies solely in one place. We have 3 branches of government. We have a very powerful 4th branch, is what I think of it as, which is media and journalism, which keeps our government functioning well. And we have a huge amount of economic institutions that play a big role across the board. So I don't think that there's one place where the responsibility lies.
Yeah.
I think it's much more complicated than it's usually presented. In thinking about social services, I just want to say that that is a relatively novel and new development that came after all these centuries of revolts, of people, you know, saying, no, we're not going to take this. That eventually government said, okay, what are the strategies we need to use? And the ruling class, both, again, working in tandem. What are the strategies that we need to use to keep people from doing this? One of them is violence, which I talk quite a bit about in these pieces, and how that really stripped people from their sense of embodied power and their ability to relate to one another and build collective power. But it was also definitely, you know, and some of the economic institutions was another strategy. So definitely like the division of labor was another one. But I would say that, you know, imprisonment was also, I go into this in the 3rd part, imprisonment become another way of breaking the solidarity of the poor. And I would say that this other piece around social services, that became kind of a, what's the bare minimum we can give people so that they don't revolt?
Wow.
Or so that we don't outstrip our capacity to run poorhouses, because that's what was happening before that. It was imprisonment, poorhouses, letting people die of starvation, or literally burning them at the stake. It was brutal for a long time across the entire European continent.
Wow.
Yeah. I feel like this was a very big response to your question.
No, I love it, because here's why. As I am also hearing it, it's one thing to read it, but it's really powerful as you're explaining it, because it brings clarity. And for me, there's going to be someone, I don't want anyone to sit and listen and, oh, I don't, we so often disconnect. Oh, that was like way back in the day. Like I learned that in history class. Therefore, it's not happening in any kind of way now. And we see it in the election. Like, to me, it's so obvious. It's like all the things that they're throwing at us, the hot shit on a stick. And it's like, but it's still narrowed down to the 2 same types of people, no matter how you look at it. And it's like, I wonder why. And so what you just did is you just helped to bring some clarity to that. You know, hopefully someone will listen to this and say, is it really a question of race? Is it really a question of gender? where's the power really sitting? Do we really have the power we think we have? And how do we know that we have the power if we don't even know what power is?
That's right.
So you just brought clarity. You brought aha for me, but you also made it practical. Like, let me come from back here, and now I'm going to bring you to the current and see how all this connects. So I love the way that you have framed it. And then also in the fact that it is more than just one thing. Because what we tend to do, especially in the westernized individual way of thinking about things, it can only be one thing at a time. And my question to that is why? History is not linear. History is happening all across the globe. It's not just because you say, here's the starting point, here's what it is, here's where we go. And yes, colonization has things, and there are other factors to that. But I think to also open our minds is to say, bullshit. Like, no, it's not just this one way. Like, let's figure out all of the things as much as we can. And then we have a more accurate picture. When we've all been taught to like look at frame things and look at things very myopically. And therefore that is correct. I'm going through an unlearning in the field of education, and how I am seeing how, as much as we say things, we're doing things differently, it's like we really aren't. You're not breaking anything other than what you're just repackaging it, but it's not working, and we know it's not working, and therefore we continue to do it.
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, reading this history, I think I was really struck at a very visceral level around this doesn't feel like a history book. Like, I think I thought I'm going to read this history, but what I felt while reading it was this is still happening. This is actually not history.
Yeah.
This is still the narrative we're living with today. This is still the dynamics we're living with today. A very clear example is there's a good chunk of this whole, women's place in the world that's about reproductive rights, reproductive freedom. And the fight for that's been like, it has not stopped. It's been nonstop ever since, that's a very obvious, and for me being, a female bodied person, like a profoundly like visceral, like awareness of like, okay, this is not in the rearview mirror. This is still a very real and present thing.
Yeah.
I'm not living in feudal Europe anymore. I'm living in 2024 United States, but we're still having this battle.
Yeah.
And we're still trying to figure out how to make sense of this world that I think doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's why I started, really feeling moved to share more from astrological teachings. I really wanted to explore more about what are the human possibilities here. How did we get into such limited narratives? And that's the thing, is like, history is narrative. It has a frame, it has a logic to it, right? And other people will tell stories about the rise of capitalism very differently, right? Like, I'm drawing from a person who, against all odds, took a feminist approach to her studies and really wanted to dive deep into what is the role that gender played, and has, a serious tome of evidence around this. It's not a theory. It is a history book. It's a tome of evidence. However, I think it's very interesting that it took so long. She wrote this book, I believe, in the 80s, I want to think, 70s, 80s. And, it took so long for a woman to have a position where she could do that. Yeah. Because of what happened centuries and centuries ago, and women being eliminated from certain social spaces where they could accrue power. So the narrative had primarily before that been very skewed. How we hear about witch trials and witch hunts is very much not capturing the larger context, which had everything to do with why those women were persecuted, oppressed, and killed, murdered,
Yeah.
But when there are specific agendas happening, it's very hard to suss out what is the truth in the narrative. We're definitely seeing that huge in our society right now. There's so many different narratives that are competing, and there's a lot of disinformation, a lot of misinformation. So how do we know, at least I feel, how do we know what are the frames, right?
Yeah.
What are the frames when we experience a narrative? What are the frames that are underpinning that narrative? What are some of the norms that are implicit in those narratives? And are we awakening to what those are and asking ourselves simple questions like, is that the only way to look at this?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I think it's an important responsibility we have right now, because there's some major turning that's happening for us across the globe in terms of how we're going to continue to respond to, you know, everything we've been describing that is now kind of the status quo, and the ramifications and consequences and outcomes of that, you know?
Yeah.
And we could both talk at great length about what all of those are. But I feel like we're kind of at a point now where we are, I think many of us are asking serious questions around what is our responsibility? What do we want to do here?
Yeah.
And questioning the narratives is a key part of that.
Yeah. We had talked before, I think my last question was about around what are you sensing? What was I saying? I was talking, well, the level of awareness of the collective, like what's the globe, what's the earth saying to you? And I've been asking people that question lately just to see where they are in the. There are some people that aren't, the veil has not been lifted yet. And I think we all will find it as we keep moving. And then there are some of us who are seeing things, and we are seeing them, and we are yelling, we're screaming, we're terrified, we're ready to fight. And it's been very interesting to hear what's the collective telling you right now. Intuitively, most of the time.
And that's why I wrote this series, is what I feel is coming forward so profoundly is that all of the violence of all these centuries is still living in our bodies. And we are searching desperately for ways to metabolize that so that we can feel like we can live into our greatest potential. I feel we get glimpses of our potential. I do think that there is some momentum around people wanting more choices and people wanting more connection. But these things feel so far out of reach from us because of our culture, because of all the things that I'm saying have become normal for us.
Yeah.
We're not quite sure how to live into those values. And so we do the strategies that we know.
Yeah.
We fight with each other. We shut down. We tell ourselves stories. These are all this. That's the whole point of this, narrative that I found helpful, is I feel like it puts those responses into context.
Yeah.
It's not to say any one of those things is wrong. It's to say all of that makes sense when you consider how we got to where we are now.
Yeah.
And what we're living with still. Yeah. These things have not been repaired. These things have not been addressed. right?
Right.
And so it's like a wound that we just keep picking at.
Yeah. I had an analogy, but I lost it. Just basically, I mean, we're not the ones crazy. I'm just going to say, we're not the ones crazy. Yet we're made to feel like we are crazy because what we try doesn't work. So, what do you do what I hear you saying is we're stuck. And as survival, we hold on to things, that coping mechanisms, if you will, that we think will help us to get through, but it's not helping us to take power back. And to just even know where our power lies. I've talked to so many people who just, in any situation, they feel powerless. And based on what you're saying, it's by design.
Yes.
But then we stay there because we don't even know. If you ask most people, they won't even know what power is, because like you said, what you see is violence. It's force. Power is forcing something upon someone or something. You have to force it rather than allow and just be open. So what would you tell someone who hears what you're saying and is like, but now power, like this is overwhelming. Like, where do I find my power? Where do I even begin?
You know, there's a number of ways that I could answer this, but I'm just going to speak from my own experience because I feel like that's just the most responsible thing for me to do. I think there's a lot out there right now that's best practice, advice, you know, whatever. I'm teacher on the mountain, let me illuminate you. That's not my journey. That's not how I come into what I'm doing. I come into what I'm doing through my own personal experiences of navigating violence, of navigating power dynamics, of trying to carry a value for care and repair in my life.
Yeah.
And I think that an earlier version of me definitely did think, like, I can create an experience of power for myself. And what has been revealed to me, and has humbled me, frankly, but in a very liberating way, is that that's not, I would say that that's not all it is. I would say that there is, I often think of it, actually how I think about the zodiac. I think about those polarities on the zodiac as a Mobius strip. So you've got, you know, Aries and Libra flowing together. You've got Cancer and Capricorn flowing together, right? And I think that power is similar. I think that we come into our own experience of our personal power so that we can better navigate what it is to be in collective power. And when we experience collective power, that's truly when we feel like, wow, I do have power as a person.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a feedback thing. And I think that a lot of, you know, my cultural conditioning has also definitely made me think of power only in certain ways. I think and so much of what I'm trying to do in this series is to get people to recognize how we've internalized this oppression. Because I really think if we're not doing that courageous work of owning the inner dominator, right? That we are more inclined to hurt one another and to hurt ourselves, both.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's as simple as going out there and, you know, this is who I am now and I'm just going to be this person. That can be part of it. But I think working through the wounds is where we really find the power, because we remember who we are and we also build the skills around repair that we so desperately need.
Yeah.
And I think if we try to just bypass that, we're missing the medicine.
No, you got to do your own work. That's the whole journey of unlearning. You have to do your own work. And because we have been so conditioned that you have a sense of power when we give it to you, when the powers that be allow you to have it. It's like a cookie. I'm going to give you a treat today. And then we walk throughout our lives with the little things in the day-to-day without a true sense of power. And I will just make it plain. You need to do your own work. You gotta, it can't happen. You can't do it for me. I can't do it for you. It is healing those wounds, and it's letting go of the identity that has been constructed through this environment of dysfunction.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, I'm at that point even in my own journey where I can completely let go of all, it's almost say the ego, but I can completely let go of all the things that I thought made me. And now it's at a point where it's, then who do you want to become? And there's freedom and power in that. And I had to do a lot of, the whole healing, snot nose crying, making mistakes and learning from them. And so I don't want anyone to hear what you're saying and only think it's theoretical without the connection to yourself, or it's something, oh, let me go to the library and find this book and I'm going to have all my answers in this book that you mentioned.
I wish it was that simple. It's not. It's definitely and it's an ongoing thing. It's, in my experience, it doesn't end. I'm still here in this culture. I'm still being impacted by it. And it's still my responsibility to do what I can to be present to that impact and to make the best choices I can to bring my values into the situations I'm in and into my relationships, including the relationship I have with myself.
Yeah.
I think that is something that doesn't get talked about a lot in our culture. How the relationship we have with ourselves is so central to how we show up.
Yeah.
What we do.
Yeah. I heard someone say today that the connection to the self, it should be all spiritual first. That if you can understand who you are on that spiritual level, and it's not tied to religion. So I just want to be clear. I don't want you to sit here and think if I get into whatever text more, that's going to help me. It's like you have to, it's a soul's journey and you have to unravel, I hate to say the wounds of the soul, but you do have to unravel those wounds of the soul. And then you can put yourself back together piece by piece, if you allow life to teach you the lessons that you're here to learn. Your lessons are different than mine, and the way you're going to learn them is different than mine. It's just interesting that once you see it, when you start to see the truth and you do that level of work, you can't unsee.
Very well put. Very well put. And
so the beauty, and those people who do see it start to see, oh, the collective, it is a higher, it's not just me. It's not just what's going on for me. I need this person. It's really getting you up to the levels of God consciousness, because before you get to God consciousness, it's more of the, what I do does have this impact on this group or these people who are just like me, and vice versa. And how do we now begin, even with all my wounds and my healing, how do we then begin to get back to what you're saying of a true connection? It ain't Facebook, y'all. It's not social media that's going to connect you. It's sitting back down and learning about people and learning their stories. And so it's interesting. I took my daughter to the library today and I found a book on the power of storytelling. I checked it out. It's the power of storytelling, but from a feminist perspective, about how women reclaim their power by telling their stories. And so I'm excited to read this book. Like I just walked across it today and it's like, because I'm now on the journey of, as I've been healing and reclaiming freedom and power for myself back, it's like, now I need to do something with it. And that has been the prompting of, what do I do with what I am learning? And it's like, I need to share it with others. And how do I do that? And then here comes this book, which was confirmation for me that that's what I should be doing. And so, nothing for you to just comment on. I just wanted to share that. I know it's like a random.
Well, I mean, I can just say that that's definitely been a growth edge for me. I have been trying to integrate more of my story into my astrological teachings. And I'll just tell you, this is very outside the norm for an astrological professional, which I find very telling and also very tragic. I know we've talked in the past about how I feel like, dominant practice in the astrological field is not helpful. I feel that we're falling short in terms of our purposes as astrologers here at this time, because so often we are defaulting to our cultural norms. And I think this is one of them. I think standing up there and being an expert instead of leveling yourself and relating to people as a human being is unfortunately a big part of the field. And I am trying to be different by presenting myself as just another human on the path.
Yes.
With things to share, and and just owning that, my own experiences and my own perceptions are an expression of my cosmic energy.
Yeah.
And there's none of us that are separate from, whatever that story is, that's our story. There's none of us that is so all seeing and all knowing can say to any one other person, something that would be universally true. That's just not the design of this. That's not what this life thing is.
Thank you. Because I am not an astrological coach of any kind. I dabble on the surface. And even again, as an educator in the field of education, I've gotten to a point where it's like, I just can't do this anymore. Because I've always said, like, professionalism has been cringy, but it's that conditioning of having you wear the mask for these pseudo benefits where you're still working a 9 to 5 and grind. Like, I can get on my soapbox about that piece, and it's just like, but we're not connecting. It doesn't feel authentic. It never did. It never does. You can't look at someone and judge competency because I'm wearing a suit and I speak proper American English. It's not even the King's English or the Queen's English. So, and it's like all of these, it's like standing in the middle of a room with everyone doing this, and I'm wearing like a device that's like constricting, and I'm screaming. I don't want to say straitjacket. Like I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, like, stop this madness. Why are we doing this? Why do we feel like this is necessary? This gives me value. It doesn't. And it's just like, it's all a lie. In the sense of, it doesn't always work. The lie is like, there's not a one way to do this thing. And, going into classrooms, and yes, best practice has been proven repeatedly. That's all that means. It just means that we tested it more than other things, and it seems to work. But that doesn't mean it works for everyone.
That's right. So, and I would say that principle applies so profoundly within the astrological worldview. Like, I would just say that, this whole idea that all Scorpios are blah, 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 all Virgos are blah, blah, blah is a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah.
Is total bullshit, because every chart is so unique in terms of where those planetary positions are, how those planets are interacting with one another within the chart, and how they're interacting with the current planetary dynamics and movements. Like, that is so unique. There is no universal recipe. And I think I almost want to say the limited capacity that we have for complexity, which we've already talked about a little bit in terms of being able to navigate these social, economic, and cultural systems, it shows up in that too, you know, in terms of people thinking, you know, it has to look a certain way, or it's gonna, you know, let me just read my sun sign horoscope. Like, there's so much depth within the astrological experience that it continues to astound me, frankly, working with other people, seeing how this shows up for them in their lives and the growth opportunities that are available. If we just collapsed all of that into, you know, these very, you know, and there's the temptation to do that. I mean, on Instagram, there are plenty of people that are trying to, you know, make a hot dollar doing that, because that is kind of the trade in our, back to capitalism, in this paradigm that we're in, you know. But what's lost in that is so profound. I can't even begin to tell you how tragic it is once you begin to see the depth that we're depriving ourselves of by doing that.
Yeah. Do you think, like, I'm hopeful that people, and you hear people like, oh, it's the age of Aquarius, it's the age of enlightenment. It's like, you could have been enlightened a long time ago. It's like, you just didn't want to see it. But anyway, I get what you're saying. And like, you had some power, like, knowledge is power. And revelation is powerful. And so it's like, while I have hope in humanity, I also have this sense that there are just some people as a collective are going to be sitting there one day and just be like, oh shit, they were right all along. Or, like, here we are because we kept doing these things. Like,
I think that's happening now.
You do?
When you say that, I think that's happening now. Absolutely. But admitting that and coming to an understanding of what that means as a process, it takes a lot of time. But I will say, like, I think that, yes, there is a time of unveiling right now, and what we're doing in the face of that matters tremendously in terms of what this so-called age of Aquarius, or even if you don't want to use that language and just say what the next decade, century, and millennia will be, you know, we are defining that now. Like, we are making really important decisions individually and collectively about what we want that future to be. And, you know, the age of Aquarius, even that, there's no singular expression of that. I mean, we see it in literature. We see Brave New World in literature. We see 1984 in literature. Like, we see these expressions of, you know, utopia, I'm putting that in air quotes, you know, that can look all kinds of different ways. Like, there's no guarantee of our salvation. If we're carrying with us all this baggage from the past centuries and we're not doing the healing work, then that is absolutely going to inform what we do next, because it's still going to be about how we are using our power. That's not going to go away. It just might be how we use our power looks a little different. I mean, we're already seeing that. Like, technology has so much power right now, and that's where the consolidation is happening. And that's a huge part of the Aquarian story. You know, how do we use knowledge and technology? Do we use it for freedom? Do we use it, you know, so there's some kind of mono mind and we all just think the same way? And, you know, that's some expression of unity, but is that actually the best we can do? Like, is that all of our beauty being expressed, or is that just one limited idea of what a few people think is the right way to do it? Like,
it's amazing to
now.
me, because people think if I build better, if I do better, then it will be better. But if you still, to your point, have inner wounds that have not been healed, it will never be better. You're just building
And
another.
Christina, I mean, this is what I talk about, and it felt was so important that I did before I ended the series in part 3. I talk about what happens when these Europeans who come from all of those centuries of trauma migrate across an Atlantic Ocean, many of them coming because they were, banned. They were told to go, or there was nothing there for them to eat. They had to leave. Right? Like, they were forced, and they're carrying all of those wounds with them. What do? They come to a new continent, and they they have this idea of freedom. They have this idea of, look at all this beautiful land that we didn't have in Europe anymore because it was all privatized.
Yeah.
Like, what are we going to do with that? And we see what happened. You know, they committed the same genocide that happened on their continent, on a new continent. You know, they oppressed a whole new set of people, enslaved them for centuries. I mean, I'm just saying, like, this is what history can teach us if we look at it. Like, we don't have to hypothesize about this. This is what happens. People can carry these beautiful visions, but the manifestation of those are very much colored by people's ability to actually face what's happened and be honest, you know, and get real with the values that they say they have.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's still the legacy in America, is definitely this very strange cognitive dissonance of, you know, all men, and that word is very telling, created equal, versus just this never ending inequality that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt so compelled to say that.
No,
after what you just said.
We're making it clearer. I don't want people to walk away. And I want to be like, your writing is very thorough, and it poses very unique perspectives that, for people who have been conditioned in the traditional educational sense, it's going to be hard to wrap our brains around. So because, and I don't want people to dismiss what you're saying. Because it's astrology. Well, I don't get into that because I'm, you know, a Christian over here. And it's like, okay, that's, there's no reason to devalue or deflect with what you're saying or derail anything, like all the 4Ds. It's not, because what you're saying is truth through your experience and lens of this connection. Just the way that I see it the same way through the lens of education. And it's time for those people who are seeing what you're saying and like, hell yeah, like, it's battle cry. Where's the war at? Let's go. It's like, we need to start explaining it in the wave through our lived experiences that matter. And I don't care what your profession is, like, the principle doesn't change. That's where the truth sits. You can put lipstick on a pig all you want. It's still going to be a pig. So I want people to catch that. And so it helped me a lot to clarify your ideas, to hear them clearly. And we don't know our history. And I was telling this to my daughter, she loves American history. She's fascinated with history. And it's like, oh, that's you. Bless your heart. And it's also painted in a way like everything, like America is so grand. And it's like, we're gonna have to do a little bit more research so you can really understand, because the way that the picture, even though they're trying to be balanced, it's still painting it in this one way. And what's that saying, that whoever is the oppressor always writes the story, tells the story, and he's gonna always paint himself in a different light. And so we don't go back far enough into our history. I was telling her how I just remember in high school, even, like, I never got to the Vietnam War. We stopped in, like, we got to 1875, and that was it.
Interesting.
We never, even in my AP history, never got to Vietnam. We might have, depending on the class, we could have heard about, and I grew up in the South. We heard about Martin Luther King, but it wasn't a connection to anything about, civil rights happened. They were fighting for, Black people's rights. Yes. And it was like, that was it. You didn't talk about anything else. So to know, like, there was a whole 20 years that we didn't learn about. And to get told, because, the history books, they have to be written, and it takes time to write these things. But you had news footage. You had newspaper articles. Like, how come we didn't learn about it? And so while I understand that people in their fields are doing the best that they can and they think they can, there's also people, like you were saying, and I can see that we can do so much better as a collective. Let's talk about that. Let's do that. Even though, like you said before, like, it takes courage. can't be curious anymore. It takes courage. Got to be more
Yeah, it
courageous
definitely
than
does take
curious.
courage.
But
It does take courage.
yeah, yeah.
I think it takes a like just peeling back a little bit more about what courage actually is.
Mm.
I always think so. It comes from the French word coeur, which is heart.
Mm.
And I always just think courage is just us being true to our hearts, us being true to the essence in ourselves,
Mm.
the part of life that wants to keep going,
Yeah.
you know, um, and thrive. And I hope that everyone has access to that. I never want it to be portrayed as the warrior courage, first of all, because I don't know how I really feel about that archetype. Because I think we need to get out of war culture. I think we need to stop thinking culture,
That it's
war
okay. I
is
see.
what
Yeah.
that war is what we're always in. I think that courage is something that lives in all of us, and we can see it in the non-human nature too. We
Mm.
can absolutely see it in animals, and even plants, like those little daffodil buds, the first ones that come up in spring
Yeah.
despite the frost and the snow. I mean, yeah, it's just the willingness to keep saying life is worth it. Let's
Yeah.
do this. You don't have, it's not a special quality is basically what I'm saying. It's not a
No.
special quality only some people have. We all have it. It's just a matter of accessing it and listening to it.
Yeah. To me, it's the fire. It's like, oh, I see what you're doing. That's bullshit. That's injustice. What can I do to make sure that more of us know about it, or that I do my part in leveling the playing field in some way, shape, or form? And so to me, the war cry is, it's here. It's the heart and the mind coming together it's going to take a lot of us to outsmart it. But Hillary Clinton did say something powerful when she said, like, we're all together in this. We're all one. And was that her that said that in her campaign? I think it was. We're stronger together. Was that her motto? Yeah. Stronger together.
That sounds vague.
And to me, it came to, it's like, yeah, we are stronger together. So then why are you, the powers that be right now, trying to divide us so much? Bullshit. How can I make sure we're together, stronger together? Maybe it's the way I perceive people that you're telling me are different and I need to be afraid of, or I hate. I'm supposed to hate these people. Maybe it's actually sitting down and having a conversation and understanding who they are, and recognizing that, oh, as we're talking, we're just two human beings. We just had two different experiences on this planet. There's nothing, wrong. So, and then it just leads you to more questions, and curiosity leads you to another level of dialogue and understanding that you then can say, oh, now I'm equipped with knowledge to, like you said, to have hope, to keep going.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that you cover. So we will have the links of all three, because are you going to do a workshop or something? I think I asked you this before. Are you going to do a workshop or something around this?
I wanted to circle back to that. I think we had talked before about, I offered a master class this year on Mars. I'm still debating how long I'm going to keep that up. So, like, up meaning available.
Yeah.
It's a, self-paced. So I do have a master class on Mars. And Mars, many people might think of as the red planet. And you may also think about, the god Mars, the war god, right?
Yeah.
So I specifically wanted to break down this archetype because I think it speaks to so much of what we've talked about in this conversation, which is, how do we use the power we have in a way that's not violent?
Yeah.
In a way that actually honors the truth of who we are, the courage that we can show up to life with, and use it constructively, use it in a way that's actually advantageous for all people. And so I really, in this course, like, deconstruct what that archetype is, how this impacts us personally. So I talk about burnout, I talk about anger and rage, right? Like, what are the purposes of these emotions and how can we use them fruitfully? And then I give like really clear, like practical tools that people can start to use to connect with the planets at this very like experiential level so that they can start to deconstruct, you know, how some of this is showing up for them in themselves, in their lives, and be able to work with this Martian energy in a way that feels very generative and feels empowering without it feeling like, you know, we're a bully or, you know, we're all these things that maybe some of us who have these values for collective care, we don't want to be, right? Like, we don't want to be the bully. We don't want to be the asshole, if I can say that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and so we kind of not really sure how to use, I think, some of those energies. So that's what I've made available that I think is really helpful for people who want to dive deeper. I would also just say that I'm always available for, you know, consultation and coaching. I do find that as much as I can speak about these universal themes and how important I feel that it is to speak about those, when I meet with people and we talk about what's actually happening for them in their lives, that's where they get the most value out of, you know, these teachings, because then it's not abstract. It's very much about how is, you know, what is happening in your life.
Yeah.
And how, you know, how can you relate to the energies within you and what is showing up in your life in ways that help you heal,
Yeah.
you know, help you grow, help you make conscious choices, get honest with yourself, all the things that we've talked about in this conversation.
And it's good
in a very like individual, specific way, like specific to that person and how they do well, right? Like, that's the real gift of this astrological lens, right? Is it's not a universal, everyone's the same. It's, well, what is actually working for you?
Yeah.
And being able to investigate that.
Yeah. So where, as we come to a close, anything that we didn't touch on that you want to close out?
Yeah, I do feel kind of compelled because you know, I talked about how I think we need to find a way to transition out of war culture. I think we've been in war culture for a really long time. And I do think that when I look at the long scheme of things, I'm talking about decades and centuries, I do think, you know, that the cosmos is supporting us in that transition. We have to participate in it. It's not an implicit, it's not, you know, a guaranteed thing. But yeah, I feel kind of compelled to say that being able to connect to that dynamic in you of feminine and masculine energies, which are not the same thing as male, female, sex, or gender. These are three separate things. I'm talking about now the masculine, feminine energy. What is the relationship between those energies in your body, in your life? I think is really critical right now for this movement. And so I think I would just want to leave people with a question around that. You know, we talked a lot about internalized depression. We talked about gender dynamics, like maybe just a curiosity and a question around, you know, how is that yin and that yang is another word that might be a little bit easier than feminine, masculine, which can carry a lot of baggage. Like, how is that yin and that yang? Like, how is the expression of that living in you today? How are you feeling about that? To me, that's more generative than this work-life balance, right? Like, really thinking about how do those energies in you meet and connect with one another? What does that connection and meeting look like? And yeah, just kind of exploring that question, I think, will be interesting in the time that we're in now. I think it has everything to do with how people come into their own sense of personal power and relationship with others at the same time.
Yeah. And so where can we find you? How do we get in touch?
Yeah, I am found in basically one place only, so that's simple for people. I'm not in all the places. I'm at dianapcartwright.substack.com, and you can get all my articles there, and you can also find out information about how to contact me if you want a consultation. Classes that I create are up there, so it's all there.
Okay. And all of Deanna's information will be in the show notes as well as on our podcast website page. This was very eye-opening. I just want to thank you for these 3 episodes. It's been very enlightening and very encouraging to hear.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that. It's a hard thing to balance sometimes,
It's well, it's encouraging because you have, again, in your intuitive side, your intuitive nature will sense certain things, but you're still figuring that out intuitively. And then there's always someone else who's like ahead and who can now articulate that thing. And that, I think that's just, I always say we're a person in the middle. There's always someone we're looking forward towards, and then there's someone we're supposed to help. And so to see it gives like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one thinking and sensing something, but what you are sensing is unique to you, and I'm sensing something, yet they come together beautifully. And then other people we talk to, it's the same thing. And so it's very encouraging to know, like, I'm not going crazy. I'm not like this. Yeah, I can be a rebel, but I'm not being the only one that's just, I'm not trying to be difficult. And I know you're going to say, like, that's a label and an archetype. Yeah, I am learning now that that's what that is. And it's like, so sometimes when you see things, it's very easy for you to be misunderstood by choice and dismissed by choice from others. And so it's very nice when you finally start to see people in your tribe somewhere. We may not be on the same planet, but we are totally in the same like spot. Like, you're doing your work, I'm doing my work, someone else is doing theirs. And it's like, yes, okay, it is worth it. It is worth it. And that gives me hope. So yes, I've learned a lot, and it has me asking more questions. So thank you.
Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really such a pleasure to join in conversation with you, and appreciate you and everything you're doing.
So yeah, until next time, you all take care. God bless. Bye.